So good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Cates. I'm the Director of Emergency Management for the City of Nashua, New Hampshire, and I'm also the incoming president for IAM Region 1. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about crowdsourcing and its value and application to emergency managers at the local, state, and federal levels. So for those of you that are familiar with the FEMA Until Help Arrives program, it's a program that FEMA put together as a way to teach citizens how they can be a part of the solution rather than being a part of the problem during a disaster. And in many cases, one of the challenges we look at is the risk involved with getting disasters out to some sort of an emergency situation. But crowdsourcing is an opportunity for us to leverage citizens back in their homes or their businesses and to help us as emergency management to figure out what's going on in an incident and the best approach to making decisions to get resources and all the stuff that's necessary to manage that emergency. And we know the stories from many of those disasters where we've tried to connect those spontaneous volunteers over to people who are assisting with social media monitoring, and crowdsourcing is our approach to making this a reality. So one of the things that I had the opportunity to get involved with was during the hurricane season with Harvey, Irma, and Maria. I had the opportunity to go down to FEMA's National Response Coordination Center, where there was work being done to establish FEMA's first crowdsourcing unit. And it was a really great initiative for us to try and pull information from the variety of sources that are out there being collected by citizens and other organizations, the tech sector, and compile it into something that's useful for those folks at the national level. But what we recognized was that's not the only people that really could leverage crowdsourced data. So we knew that there was a gap, and we came up with the crowdsourcem.org toolkit. It's meant to serve as a resource for emergency managers at all levels, as well as nonprofit emergency managers, so that they can figure out the best approach to starting a program like this from scratch. There are 8 sections on here, and what I thought I'd do today is just briefly describe some of those sections, and I hope that you'll, throughout the rest of the day and throughout the rest of the week, dive deeper into this cool toolkit and even contribute to it as we are obviously trying to promote crowdsourcing. So the first section is introduction, and it's really just a high-level overview for an emergency manager to get an idea as to what some of the benefits of crowdsourcing are, and also what are some of the challenges that they need to overcome. So for those of you that are not familiar with the term crowdsourcing is a participatory approach to trying to collect data, information, and turn it into some meaningful and useful information for our decision makers. And the key there is the participatory part of it. Ultimately, we can do lots of social media mining, we can do lots of information collection, but the participatory part is really the essential piece, trying to get digital volunteers, trying to get organizations from the tech sector engaged in our activities. And there are a number of services that are out there that you are using every day that are really key concepts related to crowdsourcing. And so where does crowdsourcing come from? Well, it's not just social media. Crowdsourcing can really leverage all types of data out there, including Internet of Things sensors. We can use official data from government or nonprofit websites. Could use information from the news media. There's lots of sources of crowdsourced data that we can use to compile into useful information. And this is really a key thing that we want to try and promote, is it's not just about social media. We also look at crowdsourcing across the spectrum, ranging from passive, being those things that require less effort from the crowdsourcing organizations, more on the data scraping. We have automatic services that will send us notifications during some sort of an incident, all the way to the active side, where we're engaging actual groups of people to assist us with collection of information. And again, you've probably seen many of these logos, many of these organizations that you use day to day, and so it's not much of a lift for us in emergency management to also use these same great technologies. There's two big misconceptions that we look at when we talk about crowdsourced data, and this is one of the things that we've seen as we've worked in emergency management a number of times that is probably the biggest roadblock for people to engage. And the first one is they think, okay, well, this is not accurate, not vetted. Where did this information come from? We have no idea. And we'll show you some examples where we were able to pull information from the crowd much faster and much more accurate than the official and authoritative data sources that were out there in the field. And then the second thing is people think that it's just about social media monitoring. And I think right now we do see a lot of social media collection as part of crowdsourcing, but I think we see more work in the Internet of Things, and the more we use some really low-cost sensors out in the field, I think we'll see additional new capabilities related to crowdsourced data. So the second section of our toolkit, integrating crowdsourcing. So the emergency manager now knows a little bit about what crowdsourcing is and how they might be able to apply it, but how do they integrate it into their existing system? This is something that people see as a big challenge, particularly as they look to see within their very formal incident command system, where does crowdsourcing fit within that? And then also, how do I collect information that can be integrated into our existing situation reports and all the things that we already are using within our organization? I want to show an example here of something that was done during, I want to say this was during Florence, and this was a crowdsourced tool that was put together by the National Alliance for Public Safety, GIS, NAPSIG, in conjunction with the International Association of Fire Chiefs and a number of digital volunteer groups that were collecting information on crowdsourced search and rescue missions. And what we had here was a heat map showing areas where search and rescue operations were being conducted during Florence. What was interesting for the decision makers was they were able to compare and contrast those authoritative, very formal, official search and rescue teams, whether they be federal or state, but also now look and compare that with the search and rescues that were being done via Twitter and the Cajun Navy and all those types of organizations out there. So one of the best practices really when we talk about crowdsourcing is being able to show those very official sources and being able to compare them to crowdsourced data for transparency purposes. The third section is the data framework. So one of the areas that we've seen time and time again when it comes to engaging groups of people out there in the field to collect information and help us out in emergency management is in many cases they're just starting over from scratch. Even though there are data standards out there, frameworks for us to quickly adopt and implement within our organizations. So in the data framework section we talk about examples of data sets that might be available out there or schemas that they can use to collect crowdsourced information. And I think one of the best examples of that is some work that was done by two groups, Code for America, a really interesting national organization out there that supports really government and voluntary efforts to connect people who are great with technology and help to solve important issues in government. And then another group called CEDAR, they're a group that was really established after the 2017 hurricane season, and what they ended up doing was collecting shelter data for responders out in those areas. We know that there's the national shelter system that the Red Cross and FEMA maintains, but we also know that there's a lot of shelters that pop up during a disaster that aren't in that system. The problem was as this data was starting to be collected, they were collecting a whole different set of attributes. It was not easy for us to compare and contrast the national shelter system data with the data that was being collected by the digital volunteers. So what we want to try and promote is the use of those same standard schemas, so that way when we're trying to build great products for our decision makers to use crowdsourced data, we can show the differences between both. But this was a great opportunity for us to also use crowdsourcing as a way to collect actual official information. The interesting story behind this was, as the hurricane progressed up the coast, they started recognizing that there were no shelters opened in Georgia, and they wondered why these were not on the national shelter system map. Well, it turns out they weren't collecting the information in the shelter system, they were just putting it on the official government state website. So these groups actually found that information and were able to put together a compiled list of that, and it was a great example of how this can be done. The fourth section, so mission scoping. So one of the things that we have also seen has been the challenge with trying to engage some sort of a group to collect information during a disaster. So how do we activate them? How do we try and find a way to give them the information that they need in order to collect stuff that will be useful for us? And we provide some examples on there of how you can get a number of organizations to share information so that they're not kind of duplicating all their work, and also how you can collect information using existing sources of data. We know that the tech sector has a number of opportunities for emergency managers to engage very easily. Could be something like the Ways for Cities program, where all it really requires is an agreement between Ways and the emergency management organization to quickly be able to collect information about road status. So we talk about how to scope out a crowdsourcing mission in this toolkit. Here's an example of an effort that we did during Dorian, and this was an activation of 3 different groups, the GIS Corps, the NAPSG Foundation, and CEDAR, where we were trying to use a crowdsourced photo map to promote preparedness activities. So if you remember in Dorian, there wasn't a whole lot of damage that really occurred after that incident, but decision makers wanted to know about what types of actions were being taken prior to the event. So volunteers were collecting information all across the internet as to lines at grocery stores, lines at gas stations. They wanted to see kind of the impact pre-event so that they could build a better picture of what types of impacts they might see in the future. And then when you tie this to some interesting work that GIS Corps can do, they actually come up with these very beautiful dashboards that decision makers love to see. The 5th section, so tools and platforms. So many know that there's lots of tech out there that can be used for crowdsourcing. And what we wanted to do is try and provide a location for people to connect to the experts in those agencies and organizations. We know that the tech sector has services that are created really for public safety, like the Google crisis maps. We've seen a lot of work that Facebook has done, but many don't know, okay, where do I connect with somebody who knows about this information? Who's the person from FEMA that I should work with? So we put contact information on there for those exact organizations. We also have information about open source projects that are out there with the intention so that digital volunteer networks that pop up as an emerging group during a crisis don't try and create something that may have already been created before. So this is a section that we continue to build out, and we want you to contribute to it as well. This is an example of how we engage with the tech sector during a crisis, using existing data feeds and services that they are maintaining. Waze, has a direct connection with products that are geospatially enabled, and this is something that, with partnership with Waze, your emergency management agency can leverage crowdsourced data too, pretty simply. Gas Buddy, a little more difficult to collect information from them, but you do have the opportunity to work with the contact that we've listed on the website. So in the middle of a crisis, if you want to try and gather information from them, now at least you know how to reach out to them. So these are 2 examples of how we can leverage really neat technology and tools to assist us with crowdsourcing during a crisis. Another one that's really difficult to get access to, but it's something I wanted to mention, is during, I want to say this was Hurricane Michael, Google has a really interesting service out there that you've probably been familiar with when you've gone to a restaurant, telling you busy times at that location. And all that's crowdsourced. And how do you think they get that information? It's from all the activity of people going to that location and checking in and all the stuff that goes along with it. But what's interesting is there are applications for this in emergency management. When we want to try and find out, is that place closed? Well, we might see that they're typically busy during this time, but there's nobody there. That might be an indication for us. Or if we see that there's a lot of people there, much more so than normal, that means there's lines there, things that we can look at as possible opportunities for us to collect more information and vet it further. So this was a partnership that FEMA had with Google, just for this incident, to try and find a better way to collect this. And there's additional efforts to try and find better ways to allow this access for other emergency managers as well. But as a minimum, though, you can easily go to your Google Maps app and see these times during a disaster. The 6th section, digital volunteer networks. So there are a number of groups that are out there that want to help during a disaster. Some are emerging, so they have never existed before. They pop up out of nowhere, and they want to try and find a way to help out during a crisis. There are also groups that are very, very established. They have great vetting processes for the information that they're collecting, and they've got such excellent expertise related to the tools that they're providing for decision makers. They're a really robust organization. And then the last section that we talk about on digital volunteer networks is how to establish your own group. I'm sure many of you have heard of the term a virtual operations support team, and that's a concept that a government agency or a nonprofit can implement to actually have their own group of digital volunteers to assist during a disaster. So this section has lots of information about how to build a program like that, or how to use existing programs that are out there. This was an interesting example. This was actually what really turned the table at FEMA on the use of crowdsourced data. For those of you that may have been involved in the response to Hurricane Maria, you probably remember that there was a big gap when it came to the status of healthcare organizations across the island. We really didn't have a good handle as to what was going on. And so one of the things that we decided to do was to check with a group called Standby Task Force, a very, very robust and mature organization. And they actually put together this tool using crowdsourced data to get access and information about what was going on with the hospitals in the affected area, which was the whole island. So this was something that we ended up getting data that was much more accurate, much more timely, and it took the federal teams days to actually get to all of these locations across the island. So I think this is a great example of how you can leverage one of these existing digital volunteer networks to help you out during a disaster. So our approach in the crowdsourceem.org toolkit is crawl, walk, run. We want you to try and identify some very simple actions that you can take to get started in crowdsourcing and work your way up to building some capacity within your organization to activate volunteers and to leverage this type of a program. And so you can easily go through the process and see in each section simple solutions all the way through complicated things that will take a little longer to work on. But definitely a great way for you to start from scratch. So my contact information is up here. I also wanted to mention Emily Marticello, who's been sort of our key contact at FEMA on this project. She has been a great resource on the federal side as to how that you can better integrate crowdsourcing, and the FEMA crowdsourcing email is there as well. Thank you very much.